You cannot launch that boat here. This is private property. I looked up from loading my fishing gear to see an angry woman in her 50s storming toward me like she was leading a military charge. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, wore a crisp white polo shirt and designer khakis, and carried herself with the kind of aggressive confidence that screamed HOA board member. Behind her followed 3 other middle-aged people, 2 men and another woman, all wearing the same furious expressions and expensive casual clothes. "Excuse me?" I said, setting down my tackle box on the wooden dock that I'd been using for the past 6 months without any problems. "You heard me," the woman shouted, her voice getting even louder as she pulled out her phone to start recording. "This dock and this entire shoreline is restricted to Lakeside Estates residents only. You're trespassing." I glanced around at the peaceful lake where I'd been coming to fish every weekend since I moved to the area. My small aluminum boat was already halfway in the water, ready for what I'd hoped would be a quiet morning of bass fishing. "I live at 847 Maple Street," I said calmly. "That's in Lakeside Estates." "That's complete nonsense," snapped one of the men behind her, a thin guy with a mustache that looked like it had been drawn on with a marker. "I'm the HOA treasurer and I know every property owner in this community. You're not one of us." "Actually, I am. I bought my house 6 months ago." "Then where's your HOA sticker?" the woman demanded aggressively, pointing at my boat with a manicured finger. "All boats must display current Lakeside Estates decals. Yours doesn't have one." I looked at my boat, which was indeed sticker-free. Nobody told me I needed a sticker. "Ignorance of the rules is no excuse," the woman declared, her voice echoing across the water. "All watercraft must be registered with the HOA and approved by the Marine Activities Committee. You're in violation of at least 6 different regulations." "Marine Activities Committee?" I almost laughed. "For a small lake in suburban Texas?" "This is not just a small lake," the other woman spoke up. She was older than the first, with gray hair and the kind of pompous voice that suggested she'd been correcting people her entire life. "This is Lake Serenity, a carefully managed aquatic ecosystem that requires proper oversight and regulation." "It's a fishing lake," I said. "People come here to catch fish." "Wrong." The blonde woman was getting even louder now, attracting stares from people across the lake. "This lake is a private recreational facility for the exclusive use of Lakeside Estates homeowners who have followed proper procedures and obtained appropriate permits." By now, several other people had gathered around to watch the confrontation. I noticed most of them were carrying fishing poles and tackle boxes, and they all had little blue stickers on their gear. "Look," I said, trying to keep things civil, "I didn't know about any permits or stickers. Just tell me where to get them and I'll take care of it." "Too late for that," the mustache guy declared triumphantly. "You've already violated community standards by attempting to launch an unregistered vessel. That's a $500 fine right there." $500? For putting a boat in the water? "Plus the trespassing violation," added the gray-haired woman. "That's another $300. "And the environmental impact fee," chimed in the fourth person, a man who'd been quiet until now. "Unregistered boats might be carrying invasive species or harmful chemicals. That's $250. I stared at them in disbelief. "You want to fine me over $1,000 for going fishing?" "We want to protect our community," the blonde woman shouted, her face turning red with anger. "This lake is a precious resource that can't be contaminated by every random person who thinks they can just show up and do whatever they want." "I'm not a random person. I live here." "Prove it," she challenged, crossing her arms. "Show us your deed." "I don't carry my house deed around when I go fishing." "Then you have no proof of residency. For all we know, you could be anyone." That's when I realized these people weren't interested in following rules or protecting the environment. They were on a power trip, pure and simple. They'd found someone they didn't recognize and decided to flex their tiny bit of authority. "Fine," I said, starting to pull my boat back onto the trailer. "I'll go home and get my paperwork. But this is ridiculous." "Don't bother coming back without proper registration," the woman called after me, her voice carrying across the entire lake area. "And next time, check the community website before you assume you can use facilities you haven't paid for." As I drove away, I could hear them laughing and congratulating each other on protecting the lake from unauthorized users. The blonde woman's voice was still echoing across the water as she told everyone within earshot about how they'd handled the trespasser situation. But what really got to me was her phrase, "facilities you haven't paid for." That stuck in my mind all the way home. When I got back to my house, I dug through my moving boxes until I found the folder with all my property documents. I'd bought the house from an elderly woman named Margaret Chin, who'd lived there for 40 years before moving to a retirement community. The sale had been pretty straightforward. No drama, no complications, just a normal real estate transaction. But as I flipped through the papers, something caught my eye. There was a separate deed, older and yellowed with age, attached to the main property deed with a paperclip. I'd never really looked at it closely before. The document was dated 1987 and titled Lake Serenity Property Deed and Water Rights Transfer. According to the paperwork, Margaret's late husband, Dr. Robert Chin, had purchased not just the house, but also the lake itself and all surrounding water rights from the original developer. I read it again more carefully this time. The language was pretty clear, including all water rights, fishing rights, boat access privileges, and shoreline management authority for the body of water known as Lake Serenity. Holy shit. I didn't just own a house in Lakeside Estates. I owned the lake. I grabbed my laptop and started researching property law and water rights in Texas. After 2 hours of reading legal documents and government websites, I was pretty sure I understood the situation. When Dr. Chin bought the water rights in 1987, he'd essentially become the owner of the lake itself. And when Margaret sold me the house, she transferred those rights to me along with everything else. But I needed to be absolutely certain before I did anything drastic. I called a real estate lawyer I'd worked with during the house purchase. Interesting situation, said Attorney Williams after I explained everything. Can you email me copies of those documents? An hour later he called me back. Congratulations, he said. You own a lake. Are you sure? Completely sure. Water rights are treated as real property in Texas, and they transfer with the deed unless specifically excluded. According to these documents, you have full ownership and management authority over Lake Serenity. What does that mean exactly? It means you can control who uses the lake, when they use it, and how they use it. You can charge fees, set rules, grant or deny access, whatever you want. The lake is your private property. But what about the HOA? Don't they have some kind of agreement? Not according to these documents. It looks like the original developer sold the water rights to Dr. Chin, probably to raise quick cash. The HOA might have been operating under the assumption that the lake was community property, but legally, it belongs to you. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Those pompous jerks had tried to fine me over $1,000 for using my own lake. They'd shouted at me, threatened me, and treated me like a criminal, all while fishing in water that I owned. Time for some payback. Over the next few days I did my homework. I researched the Lakeside Estates HOA, their rules and regulations, and their Marine Activities Committee. I found their website, which had a whole section dedicated to Lake Serenity usage guidelines, and featured photos of their annual fishing tournament, weekend boat parties, and summer swimming events. Everything they were doing required the permission of the lake owner, which was me. I also discovered that the HOA had been charging residents annual lake access fees of $200 per household, plus additional fees for boat registrations, fishing permits, and event hosting. According to their own financial documents, they'd collected over $50,000 last year in aquatic facility maintenance and management fees. They'd been charging people to use my lake and keeping all the money for themselves. The more I learned, the angrier I got. This wasn't just about a few rude people on a power trip. This was about an entire organization that had been illegally profiting from my property for years. I decided to start with a simple test. On Saturday morning, I loaded up my boat and drove back to the lake. Sure enough, the same group was there along with several others. They'd set up chairs and coolers like they owned the place, and multiple boats were already out on the water. You again, the blonde woman, I'd learned her name was Linda Morrison, the HOA president, jumped up when she saw me. I thought we made it crystal clear that you're not welcome here. Actually, Linda, I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, pulling out a folder of documents. I brought my paperwork. About time, muttered the mustache guy, whose name was apparently Dennis Kraft. I handed Linda a copy of my property deed. She looked it over with the exaggerated attention of someone trying to find fault with a perfectly good document. This just shows you own the house, she said dismissively, waving the papers in the air. It doesn't give you lake access rights. Keep reading, I said. She flipped to the second page where the water rights transfer was clearly spelled out. Her face went completely pale. This can't be right, she stammered. What's wrong? Dennis grabbed the papers out of Linda's hands. After reading for a moment, his face went white too. Is there a problem? I asked innocently. You're claiming you own the lake? Linda's voice cracked as it got higher. I'm not claiming anything. I do own the lake. Water rights, shoreline access, everything. It's all right there in the deed. The other people crowded around to read the documents. I watched their expressions change from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. "This has to be some kind of mistake," said the gray-haired woman. "The lake belongs to the community. It's been managed by the HOA for decades." "Managed by the HOA maybe? But owned by the Chin family and now by me. But we've invested thousands of dollars in lake maintenance." Linda sputtered, her voice getting shrill. "We've stocked it with fish, maintained the docks, cleaned up the shoreline." "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate all the work you've done to improve my property." "Your property?" Dennis was getting red in the face. "You can't just show up and claim ownership of a community resource." "I'm not claiming ownership. I have ownership. Legally, officially, and completely." "We'll see about that." Linda grabbed her phone with shaking hands. "I'm calling our lawyer right now." "Good idea," I said. "While you're at it, you might want to ask him about the legal implications of charging fees for access to someone else's private property." That stopped her cold. "What?" "Your website says the HOA collects $200 per year in lake access fees, plus boat registration and fishing permit costs. That's income generated from my property without my permission." The group fell silent. I could practically see the wheels turning in their heads as they realized the magnitude of their problem. "Look," Linda said, trying to sound reasonable but still speaking louder than necessary, "maybe we can work something out. The HOA could pay you a management fee or something." "That's an interesting idea," I said. "We should definitely discuss it. But first, I need everyone to clear off my property." "Clear off?" "All boats off the lake, all people off the docks and shoreline. I'm revoking the HOA's access privileges, effective immediately." "You can't do that." Dennis exploded. "People have plans. There's a fishing tournament next weekend." "Not anymore. This is outrageous." Linda was practically screaming now. "You're going to destroy our entire recreational program. You should have thought about that before you tried to fine me for using my own lake." Linda looked like she was about to have a heart attack. "Be reasonable. We can negotiate." "I am being reasonable. I'm giving you 30 minutes to remove all HOA property and personnel from the lake area. After that, anyone remaining will be trespassing." 30 minutes. That's impossible." "Then you better get started." What followed was the most satisfying chaos I'd ever witnessed. Linda got on her phone and started frantically calling other HOA board members, her voice getting higher and more panicked with each call. Dennis ran around the shoreline shouting at people to pack up their stuff. The gray-haired woman stood in the middle of it all, looking like someone had told her Santa Claus wasn't real. Within minutes, the peaceful lake area had turned into a scene from an evacuation movie. People were hauling boats out of the water, folding up chairs, and demanding explanations that nobody could provide. "This is illegal," one woman shouted at me. "I paid my lake fees." "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the confusion, but those fees were collected without the permission of the actual property owner. You might want to take that up with the HOA. The HOA told us we had access rights." The HOA was mistaken. Linda was still on her phone, pacing back and forth and getting more agitated by the minute. "What do you mean you can't get here for 2 hours? This is an emergency. Some crazy person is claiming he owns our lake." As people packed up and left, I heard plenty of angry muttering about lawyers and lawsuits and "that jerk who thinks he owns the lake." But I also noticed that several residents came over to apologize for the confusion and ask about future access arrangements. "I've been coming here for 10 years, said one older gentleman. "Had no idea there was a property dispute. What happens now?" "I'm still figuring that out," I told him. "But I'm not trying to ruin anyone's fun. I just want to make sure things are handled properly." "Fair enough. Here's my card. I'm a retired attorney. If you need any help navigating the legal issues, give me a call." By the end of the 30 minutes, the lake area was empty except for me and my boat. I finally launched it and spent a peaceful hour fishing in the sudden quiet, thinking about what came next. The HOA's lawyer called me that afternoon. "Mr. Peterson, this is Michael Rodriguez from Henderson and Associates. I represent the Lakeside Estates HOA. I understand there's been some confusion about lake access rights." "No confusion on my end," I said. "I own the lake and I've revoked the HOA's access privileges. I've reviewed the documents you provided to my clients, and while they do appear to establish water rights, the situation is more complex than you might realize." "How so?" "The HOA has been operating and maintaining the lake for over 30 years. Under Texas law, that could establish prescriptive easement rights, regardless of the original ownership. I'd been expecting this argument. Prescriptive easement requires hostile use without the owner's permission. But Dr. Chen was actively involved in HOA decisions about the lake until he died 5 years ago. His participation proves the use wasn't hostile. There was a long pause. You've done your research. I have. I also know that the HOA has been collecting fees for lake access without any legal authority to do so. That's conversion of income from my property. Mr. Peterson, nobody wants this to turn into a lengthy legal battle. What would it take to resolve this amicably? I'm open to reasonable negotiations. But first, I want a formal acknowledgement from the HOA that I own the lake and water rights. And then? Then we can discuss terms for ongoing access. But the days of the HOA acting like they own my property are over. We agreed to meet the following week to begin formal negotiations. In the meantime, I started getting visits from individual neighbors who wanted to talk about the situation. Most were surprisingly understanding once they learned the full story. Linda Morrison is a total nightmare, said one neighbor, a woman named Sarah. She's been bullying people for years with her made-up rules and arbitrary fines. I'm glad someone finally stood up to her. I heard about what happened at the lake, said another neighbor, Tom. Morrison tried to fine my wife $200 for bringing a non-approved flotation device. It was a pool noodle. The more I learned about Linda Morrison and her HOA regime, the less sympathy I felt for their situation. They'd been using the lake as their personal fiefdom, charging people fees for access while treating anyone who questioned their authority like a criminal. The negotiation meeting was held in the HOA's community center, a beige building that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd never experienced joy. Linda Morrison was there with the lawyer, along with Dennis Kraft and 2 other board members I hadn't met. Before we begin, Mr. Rodriguez said, my clients want to make it clear that they dispute the validity of your ownership claim. That's their right, I said. But disputing it doesn't change the facts. The HOA has invested significant time and money in lake maintenance and improvements. Any resolution needs to account for those contributions. I'm happy to discuss compensation for legitimate improvements. But I also need compensation for 30 years of unauthorized use and illegal fee collection. Linda Morrison's face was turning red. Illegal fee collection? We've been maintaining that lake for decades. With money collected from people who thought they were paying the lake owner. But you're not the lake owner. I am. This is ridiculous. Dennis Kraft exploded. You bought a house 6 months ago and now you think you can destroy a community tradition that's been going on since before you were born. I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm trying to establish clear ownership and fair terms for access. Fair terms? Linda leaned forward aggressively. What's fair about shutting down our recreational programs because of some technicality in an old deed? It's not a technicality. It's property law. The lawyer intervened before things got completely out of hand. Let's focus on solutions. Mr. Peterson, what would you consider reasonable terms for ongoing HOA access? I pulled out a sheet of paper I'd prepared. First, formal acknowledgement of my ownership rights. Second, all future lake-related decisions require my approval. Third, the HOA pays me an annual lease fee for exclusive access rights. How much? Rodriguez asked. $50,000 per year. The room erupted. $50,000? Linda shouted, jumping out of her chair. That's extortion. That's less than you've been collecting in unauthorized fees, I pointed out. According to your own financial records, you brought in $52,000 last year in lake-related income. That money goes to maintenance and improvements. And under my proposal you can continue doing maintenance and improvements. You'll just be paying the actual property owner for the privilege. This is insane. Dennis muttered. You're going to bankrupt the HOA. The HOA bankrupted itself by operating on someone else's property without permission. Rodriguez tried to regain control of the meeting. Mr. Peterson, $50,000 seems excessive. What would you say to a more modest fee, perhaps $10,000 annually? I'd say you should talk to your clients about what they think exclusive access to a private lake is worth. Because if they don't want to pay fair market rates, I can always open it up to the general public and charge admission. That got their attention. You wouldn't? Linda gasped. I absolutely would. Public fishing lake, boat rentals, camping sites, the works. I bet I could make a lot more than $50,000 a year. The threat of turning their quiet community lake into a commercial attraction was clearly their worst nightmare. I could see them imagining crowds of strangers tramping through their perfect neighborhood, leaving trash and making noise. We need time to consider your proposal, Rodriguez said diplomatically. Take all the time you need. But remember, every day you delay is another day the lake sits empty while you figure out whether you want to pay for access to my property. Over the next week, I got several calls from HOA board members trying to negotiate separately. Linda Morrison left 3 increasingly frantic voicemails. This is Linda Morrison, her first message began. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this community will not be held hostage by some newcomer with a piece of paper. Her second message was slightly more conciliatory. Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. But you have to understand, this lake has been the heart of our community for 30 years. We can work something out. By the third message, desperation had crept into her voice. Please call me back. The residents are furious about losing lake access. The board is threatening to remove me as president. We need to resolve this. I didn't return her calls. Finally, Rodriguez called with a counteroffer. My clients are prepared to offer $25,000 annually for continued lake access, plus formal acknowledgement of your ownership rights. Not interested. $30,000? My price is $50,000 plus reimbursement for the past 5 years of unauthorized fee collection. That's another $250,000. Mr. Peterson, that's unreasonable. What's unreasonable is an HOA collecting $500,000 in fees for using someone else's property without permission. We'll need to discuss this with the board. You do that. In the meantime, I'm going to start looking into commercial development options. That afternoon, I drove around the lake taking photos and measurements. Several neighbors came out to ask what I was doing. Just evaluating the property for potential commercial use, I told them. Thinking about a public boat launch, maybe some fishing cabins, possibly a small marina. Word spread quickly. By evening, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from panicked residents. You can't turn our lake into some kind of tourist trap, one woman pleaded. I can do whatever I want with my property, I reminded her. But I'd much rather work with the HOA on a reasonable agreement. What's reasonable? $50,000 a year and acknowledgement of ownership rights. I'll talk to Linda Morrison. The next morning, Rodriguez called again. My clients accept your terms, he said. $50,000 annually, plus acknowledgement of ownership. But they want the past fee collection issue off the table. Not happening. The HOA profited from my property for years without permission. That money belongs to me. Mr. Peterson, be realistic. We both know they don't have $250,000 sitting around. Then they can pay it over time. 5 years at $50,000 per year sounds fair. So you want $100,000 annually? 50 for ongoing access, 50 for past unauthorized use. For 5 years. There was a long pause. I'll have to discuss this with my clients. You do that. But remind them that commercial development is looking more attractive every day. 2 days later, Linda Morrison showed up at my front door. She looked terrible, her hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared, and she was wearing the same clothes I'd seen her in the day before. You're destroying our community, she screamed the moment I opened the door. Good morning, Linda. How can I help you? How can you help? You can stop this insanity. You can stop trying to extort money from families who just want to enjoy the lake. I'm not extorting anyone. I'm charging fair market value for the use of my property. Fair market value? $100,000 a year is highway robbery. Then don't pay it. But that means no lake access for HOA members. You can't do this. There has to be some kind of law against holding a community hostage. There are laws against using someone else's property without permission, which is what your HOA has been doing for 30 years. We maintained that lake. We improved it. We made it what it is. And I appreciate that. That's why I'm willing to let you continue using it instead of turning it into a commercial fishing operation. This is blackmail. This is business. She stood there breathing heavily, probably trying to think of some threat or argument that would change my mind. But we both knew she had no leverage. The board will never agree to $100,000 a year, she said finally. Then I guess the HOA won't have lake access anymore. And you'll really turn it into some kind of tourist attraction? If that's what it takes to make money from my property, absolutely. She looked defeated. What if we could do $75,000? Total? Linda, the number is $100,000 annually for 5 years. That's not negotiable. But that's $500,000. Which is exactly what your HOA collected in unauthorized fees over the past 10 years. She stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. 10 years? I had an accountant review your financial records. The lake access fees go back a lot further than 5 years. Her face went completely white. You're trying to bankrupt us. I'm trying to get fair compensation for the use of my property. The fact that your organization operated illegally for years isn't my problem. Linda Morrison turned around and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, wondering how long it would take the HOA board to accept reality. The answer was 3 days. Rodriguez called me on Thursday morning with the news. My clients accept your terms, he said. $100,000 annually for 5 years, plus formal acknowledgement of your ownership rights. Excellent. When can we finalize the paperwork? We're preparing the lease agreement now. There's just one condition. What's that? The HOA wants exclusive access during the lease period. No commercial development, no public access, no other users. That's fine. As long as they're paying for exclusive use, they can have it. And after the 5 years? We can negotiate a new agreement based on market rates at that time. The lease signing was held the following week in Rodriguez's office. Linda Morrison was there with the other board members, looking like she was attending her own funeral. She barely spoke during the entire meeting, just signed the papers with shaking hands and stared at the table. I hope you understand, Rodriguez said as we finished up, this has been very difficult for the community. I understand perfectly, I said. It's difficult when you realize you've been operating illegally for years. My clients are good people who genuinely believe they were acting in the best interests of the community. I'm sure they are good people. But good intentions don't override property law. As we left the lawyer's office, Linda Morrison finally spoke to me directly. I hope you're satisfied, she said bitterly. You've financially crippled our HOA and destroyed 30 years of community tradition. Linda, your HOA was financially crippled the moment it started collecting fees for using property it didn't own. I'm just collecting what you should have been paying all along. And what happens in 5 years when we can't afford your new demands? That depends on how reasonable your new demands are. She looked confused. My new demands? Linda, in 5 years you won't be negotiating with me anymore. You'll be negotiating with the new HOA board that gets elected after the residents find out how much money you've cost them. Her face went completely pale as the implication sank in. She'd be long gone from the board by the time the lease came up for renewal, but her legacy would be a $500,000 debt that the community would be paying for years. You planned this, she whispered. I didn't plan anything. I just enforced my property rights. 6 months later, I was enjoying a peaceful morning of fishing on my lake when I heard shouting from the shore. A group of new residents was arguing with some HOA board members about lake access fees. $500 a year? One man was yelling. That's ridiculous. It's just a small lake. The fees are necessary to cover our lease obligations, explained the new HOA president, a woman who'd replaced Linda Morrison after a contentious election. Lease obligations? To who? To the property owner. What property owner? The new president pointed toward my boat. Him. The group of residents turned to stare at me. I waved politely and went back to fishing. As I sat there in the morning sun, listening to the distant argument about fees and property rights, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that first confrontation with Linda Morrison. I'd gone from being a guy who just wanted to fish in peace to being the landlord of an entire lake. The HOA was now paying me $100,000 a year for the privilege of using my property, plus they'd taken over all maintenance responsibilities. I got to fish in a perfectly maintained lake without paying a dime, while they collected fees from residents to cover my lease payments. It wasn't quite justice. That would have required Linda Morrison and her cronies to personally pay for their years of illegal fee collection. But it was close enough. And every time I launched my boat from the dock they'd built on my property, using the ramp they'd installed with money they'd illegally collected, I remembered the day Linda Morrison had screamed at me about trespassing on private property. She'd been right about one thing, it was private property. It just wasn't hers. The best part came a year later when I was out fishing early one morning and saw a for sale sign go up in Linda's front yard. According to my neighbor Tom, she was moving to Arizona to live with her daughter. The stress of the HOA debt and her removal from the board had apparently taken its toll. She's been a nervous wreck ever since the lake thing, Tom told me. Keeps talking about how some guy stole the community lake with fake paperwork. Fake paperwork? That's what she tells everyone. Says you somehow forged documents to claim ownership of community property. I just smiled and cast my line back into the water. Let Linda Morrison believe whatever she wanted. The legal documents didn't lie, and neither did the $100,000 annual payments the HOA was now making to use my lake. As I watched the sunrise reflect off the perfectly calm water of Lake Serenity, my lake, I thought about how one person's arrogance and abuse of power had completely backfired. Linda had tried to bully me away from her lake with threats and fines, never imagining that she was actually harassing the property owner. Now she was gone, the HOA was financially crippled, and I was sitting in my boat enjoying the most expensive fishing spot in Texas. Expensive for everyone except me. Sometimes justice comes in the form of old property deeds and water rights. And sometimes it comes with a price tag of $500,000 that the bullies have to pay for their own mistakes. I caught 3 bass that morning, all of them from my very own private lake. Life was good. The final irony came 6 months later when the new HOA board, desperate to reduce costs, asked if I'd be interested in selling the lake back to the community. We could probably raise $200,000 from a special assessment, the new president explained during our phone call. Would you consider selling us the water rights? I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. No thanks, I said. I'm quite happy being a landlord. After all, why would I sell a property that was paying me $100,000 a year and would likely be worth much more when the lease came up for renewal? Linda Morrison had been absolutely right about one thing during our first confrontation. The lake was too valuable to let just anyone use it. She just never imagined that anyone included her.